Most forms of horror on the internet seem to fall into a downward spiral of declining content, which we've seen over the years with things like creepypastas and the mascot horror genre, which while at their prime were creating some of the best, most original content that horror had seen in a while, slowly started to get worse and worse until it came to the point where the quality was almost unreadable. And I think many of us know why that is, and that's because of the tropes that become quite obvious in the most popular ones, and people trying to emulate the success of those most popular versions of those stories. And I think that shows a problem that a lot of media has, which is trying to focus too much on trying to get popular instead of trying to make a unique and original story. See, when I think the original ideas get outweighed by the copycats of the already super popular ones, then I think that spells the death of the genre. For example, I would look at Sonic.exe. The extreme success of it allowed many people to want to try and copy that, and this became a problem rather quickly for the creepypasta community as they got really overwhelmed with stories that followed the exact same beats as Sonic.exe. And combine that with the fact that frankly Sonic.exe wasn't a very good story whatsoever in the first place, with hardly any redeeming qualities, the creepypasta forums were rapidly swarmed with stories that just like it, which spelled disaster. And you can only have so many poor quality versions of a .exe story because they all seem to follow the exact same beat, which is this: a creepy thing happens in an old video game and it shows that the game is actually haunted by an evil version of the main character. And you can only do that exact same story so many times before it becomes just stale and uninteresting, and it did become stale and uninteresting really fast, as we saw so many stories that followed the exact same beats. And when you get so many things of such poor quality, it paints a bad image for the community as a whole and causes people to become quickly disillusioned with the new form of horror, and then they would just try to move on to something else because the idea was just no longer scary anymore. And I have a strong feeling that we're going to start to see this happen with analog horror, as I've gotten more and more frustrated with the genre as a whole, with many of the newest popular analog horror videos being blatantly worse versions of ones that already came out before them. And it seems like we're seeing analog horror go down the exact same downward spiral as we have seen many times before, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse quality over time. And I think one of the analog horror videos exemplifies this problem more than any of them, as it shows just how bad the trope writing has gotten to this point. But before we get on with the video, many of you are not subscribed, so if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and if you watched all the way through the video, let me know your thoughts on the video down below, and I'll try to respond to your opinion as fast as possible, and I'll try to respond to any of the messages I get. Okay, now let's get on with the video, because oh boy, I think analog horror is really showing off just how oversaturated it has become. I remember when I first started watching analog horror with Local 58 and the Mandela catalog, and I was surprised by just how original and refreshing the new genre of horror is compared to what we had to deal with before. The idea of a creepy TV broadcast was something new and was a welcome addition to the horror community, and I think that the way shows like The Walton Files and Kane Pixels fine-tuned it, and then Greylock perfected it and allowed the genre to show just how scary it could be. For example, one of the best pieces of analog horror I think came from The Walton Files, which of course would be the Mysterious House episode, which took a Stranger Danger style cartoon and took it up to 11, and it really stuck with me. And if you wanted to watch a deeper explanation of why that video is just so scary, I would highly recommend Pastra's videos covering it, as they go into a lot more depth than I can in this single video. Then I was surprised when I started to notice that analog horror just seemed to stop changing. Like, no, completely stopped changing. It was just all the same. There was almost no innovation going on whatsoever within the genre, and it's starting to become more and more stale, as it was just the same style over and over again. It just became the same exact format for every single one, a television broadcast where occasionally a spooky face would appear for a couple seconds to startle and scare the viewer. And I think this is none more evident than in the Boiled One phenomenon. Now let's get this out of the way first. I know you are most likely already typing an extremely aggressive comment talking about how I'm a fucking idiot for disliking the Boiled One phenomenon. And that's actually the best analog ever, and first off, stop. I don't hate the Boiled One phenomenon whatsoever. There are parts of it that I love and can appreciate. First off, the monster design is frankly impeccable, and caught me off guard the first time I checked out their channel. The atmosphere the creatures create just by their appearance is quite great, and the fact that they were made by someone who's 17 is extremely impressive and should be noted, because if I was watching this when I was younger, the design would have most likely given me horrible nightmares just by how creepy the monsters appear. And frankly, I find it extremely impressive, because we haven't seen monsters like this in a while, because they're just like these big eldritch beings that are really creepy looking, and they do carry a lot of the horror of the videos on their own, because it's just these really well designed monsters. And frankly, Dr. Nowhere does a great job at showing off these creatures in a way to make them that they just scare the shit out of the viewer. So honestly, props to Dr. Nowhere, as I think almost every single one of their monster designs have been truly memorable, and I find myself thinking about their designs a lot more than many of the other analog horror creatures put out there. And I think their monster designs is what truly made the analog horror videos blow up in the first place, because it's definitely not the story. Secondly, this video will not just be a hate video on the Boiled One phenomenon. This is more so to list up my grievances with analog horror as a whole, and I think the Boiled One phenomenon is the best series for showing a lot of the problems that analog horror has. And Dr. Nowhere, if you find yourself watching this video, I just want you to know that I think you have great potential and should just keep going at it. I just think that you might need a little bit more practice, if that makes sense, because I think that overall your monster designs are excellent. I just think the writing is a little bit subpar. Where I think the Boiled One phenomenon runs into many issues is with the usage of the exact same format we have seen now hundreds of times, and it's almost funny with just how many tropes you run into while watching it. First off, scary face, and that's it. There's nothing particularly frightening about the story of the Boiled One phenomenon, as it's just the kind of standard fare for these kind of horror stories. It's just the standard cognito hazard where it haunts you if you view it like The Ring and many other VHS-based horrors. The monster's a demon that traps you in your body while you are still alive, like a contagious form of locked-in syndrome. While the idea of being trapped in your own personal hell while still very much alive is somewhat frightening, the execution of the story I think isn't. A lot of the voice acting and frankly editing ruined the horror of the idea for me, as I was distracted by the clumsier line readings and the goofy way the structure is set up. I think the Boiled One phenomenon is a prime case of the monster being revealed way too soon, and why I think analog horrors like The Man in the Suit do their executions a little bit better, as they were able to make the horror of the situation that much more frightening by making it so that we don't really know what's going on and what the creature really looks like till a lot later, allowing the story to have much more of a build-up and a lot more tension. Even though making the story a little bit slower, it somehow makes it tighter in pace. So I think by showing the monster in the first 3 minutes, all of the horror of the monster is sucked away in an instant, as we see it way too early for it to actually stick with you. And I think we see way too much of it for it to actually stick with you throughout the runtime, because it doesn't actually frighten you because you know what it looks like. And here's the thing, while I think the monster design is great and it shows off the talent of the creator, but there's still many problems with the way they show it. It pops up without warning about 3 minutes into the video, and when it does, it just speaks to you backwards. It's just an annoying trope that we've seen thousands of times in other YouTube horror videos, which is a startling figure with the figure speaking backwards. We've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times before, and when we see this, it's just the same old thing. I can only see a frightening figure speaking to me backwards so many times before it loses its intrigue, and I don't find it interesting or mysterious at this point, just annoying and not scary. That's a problem I'm seeing with analog horror as a whole right now. I think the genre may have peaked because it's just not scary anymore, which is unfortunate because I see this being one of the main horror genres for quite some time on the internet, unfortunately. But I think we've just seen way too many television broadcast style analog horror films, and the way a lot of the horror is set up just feels like a worse version of older horror videos on YouTube's, like Obey the Walrus, with the weird figure speaking and cutting to slightly disturbing imagery throughout. Like seriously, the Boiled One phenomenon would fit right in with a lot of the 2008 style horror videos, because it just feels that kind of vibe where it's just like a slightly creepy creature with a lot of weird imagery in the middle. And I hate having to say this because I find some of the other videos on Dr. Nowhere's channel to be way more frightening than the Boiled One phenomenon. So it doesn't make sense to me why this one got so much more popular than all the other ones. So I fail to see why we are saying the same old story becoming the most popular ones once again, and I feel like we're just leading ourselves down the exact same path as creepypastas before this. With creepypastas, the ones that blew up got seemingly progressively worse and worse in quality after its peak in the mid-2010s, and then fell off into obscurity as many storytellers strayed away from the genre, with only a few still remaining within the subgenre at this point. And I feel like we're going to start seeing the exact same thing happen now, as many of the new analog horror videos coming out just aren't reaching the heights of other like Greylock and Walton Files before it. But hopefully, just like creepypastas, we'll see analog horror have a resurgence with a lot of fresh ideas, like we are seeing right now for creepypastas, but the only way we'll be able to see is with time, and that's what we're going to just have to give it to see if it gets better or if it's just going to get worse.